Information is power. The more information you have, the better you'll be able to respond to what your enemies or arch nemesis do. The good arch nemesis will try to hide what they're doing from you, so make sure that you can infer the most from the little things too. You have to then use that information properly and crush them. No half measures. You guessed it. We're talking about scouting in a game, not real life. Please don't crush people, or if you do, just don't say we told you to. Hey everyone, and welcome to another ProGuides TFT video. My name is Dan, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most important actions you need to take in TFT, scouting. For those of you who were or are Eagle Scouts, you can carry on to the next video. The rest of you can stay. There is nuance to properly scouting and not just looking at other people's boards, marveling at how they have color matched their comp with their arena. You have to look for different kinds of information depending on the game state, organize it differently, and more. We have broken down scouting into early, mid, and late game scouting as how you scout changes the most depending on the state of the game. Before we dive in, I just want to let you guys know that we have a Discord community and a new subreddit that is growing really fast. We have you to thank for that, and we want to continue building our community and helping you be a part of it, so make sure you check the link in the description below. I'll see you guys there. Scouting is an evergreen skill. TFT will always have need for it, and it transfers well to other strategy or auto battler games too. Learning and applying it will create a qualitative difference in low platinum and below, winning you rounds that you shouldn't otherwise, and will be the edge you need above those elos to compete and rank up to the rank you want. It is paired with positioning, as you need to do something with the information you get from it. So let's go over it. Early game scouting. In the early game, there are specific times when you should scout. Doing so at the beginning is fairly useless, but since there's not much going on at the start of the game, it's a good time to get familiar with the names of the people you're playing with. We don't mean for you to ask their real names, of course, their game tags will do. There is a reason for this, and we will explain later in the video. Alternatively, you can remember their little legend. The next time for some good scouting past the initial phase is right after PvE ends. You are not really looking at units here. What people play in 2-1 will change later, especially as you go up the ranks and playing the best board you have is more common. Instead, you look at what items they got. Knowing their components can let you think about potential comp-defining items they can go for, even if they haven't combined them yet. They might be waiting for the champion they need to combine them, but don't let that fool you. For example, Astronaut Mole Diver got 2 bows early, while Jeweled Protector got 2 tiers. It's a fair assumption that in 10.17, the Mole Diver player will go 6 Blade Masters, where the Protector will have options between Star Guardians and Victor Mech. After 2-1, your scouting purpose does not change for the duration of the early game. Your goal when scouting is to check for which comps are the most contented and usually avoid them like Urgot does mirrors. There are a couple of ways to do that quickly, since time is a finite source in TFT and you gotta make the most of it. First, you can quickly swipe through the whole lobby and only check the trait and class synergies on the left part of the interface. This is not the best option, but it's fast. The reason it's not the best is exactly because playing your best board is a thing. A person might be playing sorcerers with the intent of going space pirate rebels. Second, you check benches. TFT has near perfect information. Outside of each player's shop, you can see it all. Make use of it. By looking at a bench that is at odds with what is being played on board, you can tell if the person is playing their best board at the moment and will switch to something else, or if they're unsure of what to play. Of course, if the bench and board are of a similar vein, then the person is probably playing Cybern. Wait, no, that's a terrible pun. If they are similar, then they are already decided and you can stop scouting them for contest purposes. There's another purpose to scouting which is less pronounced in the early game due to the lack of units on the board. Usually throughout stage 2, there's a maximum of 10 units on board, which does not allow for too many positioning shenanigans. So you will not scout for positioning too often. There are, of course, exceptions to this. If you're playing infiltrators, you have to scout, and since it's hard to tell who you face that early, just see which side people lean on. If most of the lobby leans on the left, put your infiltrators on the left. You can also split them to the left and right, but one of them is probably going to end up hitting the front line, which wastes their effort most of the time. Another exception is the RE positioning we talked about in the last video. Similarly to infiltrators, you want to be on the same side of most of the lobby for it to work. A very important thing to remember when scouting in the early game is don't overthink it. We've seen people get paralysis by analysis early and miss out on their own stuff. Remember, when structuring a turn, you deal with your own board and actions first, then you scout. If your actions have to be informed by your scouting, for example, if your comp might be contested, then set specific timers for yourself. For example, say I am going to make a decision after Crumbz, so I will just go through the motions until then and focus on scouting and positioning. Mid-game scouting. This is where the fun begins. Scouting in the mid-game is like a good avatar. It's all about balance. If you didn't get that reference, the scriptwriter is a boomer. As you're forced to make harder decisions, move more units and more often, the mid-game usually leaves you with less time for scouting. All 8 people are also alive most of the time, so it's not like there's less work. Starting with scouting purposes, you keep checking for contest, but since you are mostly locked in, the information you get serves in a different capacity. Instead of pivoting, you now have to know when to roll, how easy it is to get your comp's carry, like Jhin or Master Yi, and so on. Knowing that 2 other people have 2 Jhins each means that you will have a tougher time finding him, so maybe you shouldn't focus on getting Jhin items in the next carousel and focus on Teemo instead. Information like that is huge in determining your next steps in the game, and you can get it simply by scouting. The next scouting purpose in the mid-game is the increasing need for positioning properly. As your comp comes together, positioning can make or break you. We don't want you broken, so let's scout. This is where most of your health will be lost, as more units are in the field and the stage damage starts counting. Every unit and every loss counts, so position properly to eke out the most out of your units. Remember when I told you to try and commit your opponent's names to memory? This is where it's a lot more useful. If you have good memory and your opponents are not named A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 13, you can just look at the match history and position for the people you did not face yet this stage. If you want to do it faster though, you can use a simple mnemonic. Take the first letter of each opponent you face and remember that instead of the whole name. Then go to the opponent list at the right of the interface and cross-check. I promise it's not as much work as it sounds. This gets progressively easier to do as people die or the farther you get into the stage, since you can eliminate more people. There is a really important trick to scouting in the mid-game with the purpose of counter-positioning. Don't position for people you can't beat. It sounds simple, but TFT combat is fairly randomized. You need to have a good eye for board strength to do that, and if you've seen all our TFT videos, I know you do. Positioning is important, but it can't bridge huge differences in power. By positioning for people whom you can more likely beat, you don't eliminate the need to scout the top people, but you can focus more on the rest. You still need to lose by killing as many units as possible, but winning is better than losing graciously, right? Make sure to scout carefully and definitely use the ghost trick we learned in our positioning video. At this stage, Zephyr or Shroud can outright win you a match you had no business winning, so surprising opponents like that by scouting their carries is really strong. Late game scouting. This is the toughest part. In higher elos, the mind games at this stage are delicious. At the late game, there's way less people, or if you find yourself at that 1v1 for first and second, you know they are scouting you as well, so you have to use that. An interesting trick is to forego the usual turn structure, especially if your comp is more or less complete, and just instantly scout the opponents. Once on their board, notice how they move their units around, if they do. People swap things around out of boredom, or to figure out if it would be better to position in a certain way. When they swap early into the turn, it often means they will swap back to their previous position. So register that one and try to counter by either position in a way that counters both, or makes them inconsequential. Another really important trick to keep in mind is to start figuring out who your opponents are positioning for. If they're positioning for you, you know they're scouting you. Try moving your Jhin back and forth a bit and see if their positioning changes. When it does, well, then you try to counter them. But when they are positioning for someone else, you know they're not really looking at you. A last-minute swap of your Shaco to drop on their poor Jinx is going to catch them by surprise. If you have enough time, there's a simple trick to being quick about positioning, since the scouting information changes all the time. You can have a default position in the middle of the board, which you return to every round, and move to your preferred positioning in the last 5 seconds. Scouting in the late game is less about the action and much more about how you deal with the information you receive. You have no way to verify 100% that the information you get is going to stay the same, so you have to use tricks like this to deal with most outcomes. Finally, you have to start looking at patterns when scouting. This does not only go for late game, but it is most pronounced then. There are generic good positions for carries, often the hex next to the corner. Check where people have their carries in your lobby. Let's say you're facing anyone between 3 people. 2 of them have their carry on the left side next to the corner, while the other one has it on the right. You would put your Zephyr or infiltrators on the left side, essentially betting on the higher chances of hitting something useful. In general, late game scouting is like an endless I know that you know that I know that you know phase. If you don't enjoy that, you can still use some of the tricks we mentioned and minimize your scouting. That's absolutely fine. Being able to infer the right things and read your opponent's minds to the extent that it's possible is the marker of a high elo TFT player. Skills like positioning, scouting, decision making are all skills that allow you to control for the RNG in the game and reach a level of consistency that will enable you to rank up. Learn them and see you up there. As always, feedback is appreciated, so hit us in the comments. If you like this video, hit the like and subscribe button, and if you want to find me on social, you can at Daniel Ammerman, and I will see you guys in the next one. Now get out there and farm some LP using what you learned today.